Hi, welcome back to our channel. Today we'll be talking, this will be part 2 of looking at the Trump campaign's re-election, well not re-election, but 2024 campaign, and the issues that are most important to the Trump campaign. Today we'll be focusing on fair trade for the American worker, unleash the energy dominance, and then securing the border and reclaiming national sovereignty. So fair trade for the, to quote the Trump campaign website, fair trade for the American worker, Donald Trump recognizes long before he became president that we cannot have free and open trade if some countries will exploit the system at the expenses of others. President Trump replaces decades of calamitous multinational trade blunders with fair and reciprocal trade that return jobs, wealth, and manufacturing to America. He canceled the job-killing Trans-Pacific Partnership, replaced the NAFTA nightmare with the groundbreaking USMCA, and renegotiated the one-sided South Korean deal. President Trump confronted the unfair trade practices imposed tariffs on China, and then brought billions of dollars into the federal treasury, expanded the American agriculture, and opened thousands of new factories. President Trump will implement a 4-year national reshoring plan so the United States no longer needs to rely on China for essential medical and national security goods, and ban Chinese ownership of critical infrastructure in the United States. We'll bring back our supply chains and build America into the manufacturing superpower of the world. Okay, so to cut through all the nonsense, fair trade really only benefits usually the more dominant powers, the yada yada yada, but that's besides the point. So that's why we get a lot of cheap goods out from China, South Korea, and that's Vietnam, like Southeast Asia. That's why it's usually way cheaper for American companies to produce things in like Mexico as well and sell them in the US instead of paying American workers. And so the whole idea was Trump was going to put tariffs and renegotiate trade deals with like China, South Korea, Mexico, and Canada. So we'll talk about first him replacing NAFTA with the USMCA. It's literally just NAFTA again. So he increased the requirement of having the UFC requires 75% of the vehicle's parts to be made in one of the 3 countries, up from the current 62.5% rule, in order to remain free of tariffs when moving between the 3 signatory countries. That's from CNN's website. Long story short, the majority of the vehicle needs to be either made in Mexico, China, or the US to be tariff-free. They also added more labor protections and rules into Mexico to ensure there's a more level playing field with American workers. But we'll see how that actually goes. It's supposed to have a regulatory, the US can more or less have a regulatory force that checks the standards. It offered more of a dairy farmers access, milk access. That's basically it. Everything else is still the same. It's literally just NAFTA 2.0. We'll probably still see more jobs leaving instead of going to Mexico. We'll probably still go to Mexico. Like we saw with Kellogg's. We literally were seeing factories close under the Trump administration in the last couple of years after the UMC, with like Kellogg's and like other others, like car manufacturers as well, going to Mexico. So literally nothing changed. And for his South Korean trade deal, all that really changed was they removed a limit on the caps of U.S. cars could export to South Korea that don't meet the Korean safety standards. They extended a 25% tariff on U.S. imports on Korean trucks. So pretty much just making Korean trucks a little bit more expensive in America. He was trying to open up the Korean markets to U.S. car manufacturers, but we'll wait to see because it doesn't seem like really anything changed. So China reciprocated and stopped importing a lot of soybeans from the U.S. 92% of the tax tariffs revenue grown from the China's tariffs have been going to bail out the farmers that he's literally destroyed their livelihood. Because China is one of the biggest importers of American soy. Now they're just going to Brazil. We're forced to bail out the farmers because they lack access to the Chinese market now. So yay, I guess. It's also why you've seen a lot of goods imported from China recently becoming more expensive, because like the tariffs are only going to make the price more expensive for us. And if they start losing money, manufacturers aren't coming back to the US Because it's still going to be cheaper to go to Vietnam, Nepal, and other Southeast Asian countries where labor is even cheaper than China, which is you see is happening now, because the Chinese economy is shifting more from a manufacturing economy to more of a service economy like the U.S. So you see a lot of Chinese, like the growing Chinese middle class. So basically, doing the trade war with China is actually a strategic mistake on the U.S.'s part, because we're losing access to a critical market because Chinese people love American goods and products, because it's seen as more higher quality than the Chinese products. So having a trade war with China is not a great idea. So he wants to implement a 4-year reshoring plan, so the U.S. needs to no longer rely on China for medical and national security goods. You would have to convince basically several manufacturers to shift from actually not even just going to Vietnam and other Southeast Asian countries. Labor's too expensive in America for them to make a profit. So when it comes to actual manufacturing and businesses, their largest expense is always going to be labor, because they can always get cheap natural resources from like Africa, Asia, or whatever, where people are way poorer. But the labor is always more expensive. And China has a lot of highly educated and skilled labor force. That's why they usually go to China to build like medical supplies and other goods. The US doesn't have the same kind of labor power. We're in the same boat as China, where our population is aging and people aren't as educated. Basically, we'd have to cut off all trade ties with all of Southeast Asia and China to force companies to even do business in the US, because the US still has high labor costs, and inflation is not helping with that, because now we need to increase labor. So we're in a spiral where you need to constantly increase wages, which increases prices, which causes the whole inflation thing. The companies aren't coming back to America. It's too expensive. They're gonna fucking go wherever they can to get cheaper labor. Pretty much, unless you want to ban literally trade with everyone, especially like developing countries, you really can't force companies to come back. You can try though. Okay, we'll go next to unleashing the energy dominance. Under President Donald Trump, the United States became the #1 producer of oil and natural gas on the earth, achieving American energy independence, delivering historically low costs for oil, gas, and diesel electricity to consumers and businesses. President Trump unlocked our country's God-given abundance of natural gas, clean oil. He approved the Keystone and Dakota Access pipelines, opening federal lands to offshore and responsible oil and gas production, ending the unfair and costly Paris climate accords. Joe Biden reversed the energy revolution, is now enriching foreign adversaries abroad. President Trump will unleash production of domestic energy resources, reducing soaring prices of gasoline, diesel, and natural gas, promoting energy security for our friends around the world, eliminating the socialist New Green Deal, and ensure the United States is never at the mercy of a foreign supplier of energy. So first things first, the president doesn't control the oil markets. It's the OPEC, usually with the help of as well, mostly Saudi Arabia and Russia. So the U.S. oil boom is mostly due to the shale revolution that started under Obama, where they realized they could produce oil and gas from shale very easily. And higher oil prices actually makes it more profitable. So the higher the oil prices go, the better it is for the shale industry in the U.S., because it costs way more to actually produce shale oil than to produce natural gas, because it involves fracking and other way more costly expenditures. And also the fact is, during that period, Saudi Arabia was trying to destroy the shale industry in the U.S. and regaining back their dominance. And the reason why the oil has gone up so is mainly because, one, there's a trade, we're embargoing Russia at the moment because of the war. Two, Saudi Arabia decided to reduce production. And then, three, the U.S., after the end of the Iranian nuclear deal, it pretty much made it harder for Iran to export oil, which is causing the oil supply to reduce market-wise. We even saw earlier this week, Trump talked about how his plan was to overthrow the Venezuelan government to gain more access to the oil. His plan actually is basically to keep cooing. What the U.S. has been doing forcing open up markets for gasoline and diesel, like Venezuela. So instead of killing him, you see the Biden administration trying to work with Venezuela and Iran to put more oil onto the market. But sooner or later, we're going to run out of oil, but who knows when. And the only way to reduce the prices is for the U.S. to actually convince the OPEC countries to either produce more oil to lower the market demand, or so that because right now it's way more profitable for the U.S. market, natural gas and oil, to actually export to Europe because they can charge them more. Because they're losing access to the Russian like natural gas supplies. So the market's kind of fucked either way at the moment. The president doesn't control the oil. That's literally it. And also the Paris Climate Accord wasn't even in place. Like it doesn't really enforce anything. It was literally nothing. Securing the border and reclaiming national sovereignty. President Donald Trump created the most secure border in the U.S. history and ended up catch and release, took down human traffickers, deported record numbers of illegal alien gang members, built 450 miles of the powerful wall. Joe Biden turned our country into one giant sanctuary for dangerous criminal aliens, and when he suspended all immigration enforcement in the middle of the global pandemic, and reversed landmark agreements that safely return asylum seekers to Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. The onslaught of illegals invading our wide-open borders, threatening public safety, draining Treasury, undermines the U.S. workers, burden schools and hospitals. President Trump will shut down the border disaster. He will again end catch and release, restore remain in Mexico, eliminate silent fraud and cooperative states. Trump will deputize the National Guard and local enforcement with the assistance and rapidly removing illegal alien gangs and criminals. He will also deliver a merit-based immigration system that protects American labor and promotes American values. So first things first, that 450 miles of powerful wall he built, the vast majority was already the existing wall. And then on top of that, all he did was add new fencing and restored it. Biden didn't even end the Remain in Mexico policy during the pandemic, mainly because he didn't want to, and then he got blocked by the courts. Then a lot of the asylum seekers coming from Honduras, Mexico, and El Salvador and Guatemala, it's because of the drug war. A lot of gang members were deported from the U.S. to Central America during the Obama administration, and during that time, like MS-13 and such, they more or less rebuilt their gangs in those countries and made it more or less terrorizing the local people. On top of that, we have this problem that we continuously fuck around in Latin America for the last 100 years, killing their governments, installing new dictatorships, that sort of deal, more or less making unlivable down there. Pretty much, people are going to continue coming from Latin America as long as we want cheap goods from Latin America, and we're sending, basically, as long as we keep wanting drugs. That's pretty much it. There's a ongoing drug war that's been going on since the 80s with the cartels. There's really nothing we can do. People are going to continue coming to the U.S. It's they're usually not even burdens on public safety or Treasury or schools, because all first generation immigrants have lower crime statistics than the average American. It's usually by the second or third generation they commit just as much crime as the average American. And then on top of that, they usually are paying local taxes, and then they don't get Social Security or other benefits from actually being a U.S. citizen. So they're actually boosting up Social Security and their other fundings because they don't have access to it, or other social programs because they don't actually have access to it. So immigrants are actually kind of good for us. The whole they steal jobs, it's more or less because of they do the jobs that no one wants to do, which is hard labor jobs in construction, farming, that sort of deal. And then in factories, companies realize they can get away with hiring illegal immigrants and paying them way less, so they're going to. It's not the immigrants' fault. It's literally because of it's the manufacturers, the employers. They're the ones doing this. The immigrants, They're trying to make a better life for themselves. Like, it's the logical thing for the employer to actually choose someone who will take less money. It's literally how capitalism works. They need to make more money, and hiring immigrants is the best way to do it. They're not the enemy. The enemy are the people who actually own the corporations, the companies, and businesses. They want people to exploit easily, which are usually people who don't speak English, queer people, other minorities. They're very easy to exploit because they're in vulnerable positions in society, so companies will exploit them. And literally, that's it. So, yeah. There's still a lot more to go. I kind of wanted to do a lightning round because there's like so much shit on his website. Hopefully you found this informative. Like, thank you for listening. Like, comment, and subscribe. Part 3 will be soon. The drug cartels and crime and like everything else. Hopefully you find it informative. Thank you for listening. Bye.